Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Wainwright, and I'm here to talk to you about inclusion in special education, its past, its present, and its future. This presentation will cover the past with a brief history of special education, the present with the benefits of inclusionary practices in today's classroom, and conclude with the future of inclusion. Let's begin with the past, with the history of special education. Prior to the 1970s, there was not much history of special education. Children with disabilities in this time had very few prospects to receive an education, and Congress estimated that fewer than 1 in 5 children with disabilities in the United States received an education at all. Of this number, most of these students were from families who could afford to send them to separate private schools with specialized support. Furthermore, the quality of education in these skills was not consistent and did not always teach students the skills they needed to be competitive in the job market after they left school. And this further separated students with disabilities from the rest of American society. This began to change in 1975 when Congress passed a series of laws establishing practices for the education of students with disabilities. This law was later renamed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA, and we will be referring to it many times throughout this presentation. This law did a couple things, among them, establishing the right of every child in America to a free, appropriate public education based on their individual needs. It also required schools to evaluate students for special education at no cost to their families. Lastly, it required that children with disabilities be educated alongside their peers without disabilities to the maximum extent possible. This practice is called inclusion, although the IDEA defines it as least restrictive environment. And this will be the subject of the rest of the presentation. So let's talk for a minute about what inclusion, or least restrictive environment, means. First and foremost, it is a shift in perspective in the way we educate students with disabilities. Whereas in the past, these students were sent away to a separate educational setting that had the supports they needed. Inclusion instead brings these supports to the classroom that the student is already in. Rather than being educated away from their peers, with inclusionary practices, students with disabilities are educated alongside their peers. These supports that come into the classroom might be assistive technologies, such as a hearing aid or a graphic organizer, text-to-speech software, or it could be staff, such as an aide or an interpreter. Research shows that inclusion has many benefits, both to students with disabilities and to those without. First and foremost, rather than separating students with disabilities, inclusion instead brings them in to the same classroom as students without disabilities. This shows students that they are welcome, that they belong, and that they are part of the classroom and the school at large. And that benefit alone is quite significant. Another benefit, which may be unsurprising, is that peer relationships between students with disabilities and those without also improve in inclusionary classrooms. Next up, language development for students with disabilities shows significant improvements in inclusionary settings as early as preschool. And lastly, students who are in inclusionary settings tend to go to school more, to an average of 3 days per school year. So students who are in inclusionary classrooms spend more time at school, which speaks to its benefits to all students. Now you may be thinking that inclusion sounds pretty great. Why is this an issue that we're talking about here? And the reason being, there is still some opposition to it out there. There are some groups of parents and teachers that worry that while inclusionary classrooms benefit students with disabilities, that this benefit might come at the expense of students without disabilities. They might worry that the modifications required would change the content of what the rest of the students are learning, or perhaps that the teacher will be spending extra time and energy helping one student, leaving less time to help the rest of the students. Research, however, disagrees. I came across two studies that indicated that the impact of being in an inclusive classroom for students without disabilities is either positive or it's neutral. Very seldom does it create a negative impact. So, for most students, being in an inclusive classroom either benefits them or it does nothing. Another concern from these groups is that extreme behavior problems could distract other students or perhaps even threaten their physical safety. Research, again, disagrees. I found two studies that acknowledge that, yes, being in a classroom with multiple students with a diagnosed severe emotional disability can have a negative impact on a student's ability to learn. However, these researchers have concluded that this negative impact is relatively minor in scope, and argue that the benefits to an inclusionary classroom outweigh this relatively minor risk. And now on to the future of inclusion. This is an issue that is evolving and may be changing rapidly in the coming months. The current presidential administration has proposed significant cuts to the Department of Education. The Department of Education oversees implementation of the IDEA and administers the funds that support special education program. With reduction in these funds, related services such as transportation, staffing, and assistive technology would likely be reduced in many schools. Additionally, the Department of Education manages accountability for these funds and ensures that money given to special education goes to special education. Without this oversight, there is no guarantee that these funds would go where they were allocated, which could very much impact how inclusion is carried out in the classroom. And now on to philosophy. So of the philosophies we learned about in this course, I saw inclusion very closely aligned with the progressivist philosophy. The definition of progressivism used in this class was a flexible, integrated study of academic subjects around the needs and experiences of students. As special education is all about individual accommodations and modifications based on the student's unique needs, these two seem very aligned. Additionally, inclusion has always been a part of my own teaching practice and is part of my own teaching philosophy. I believe that by including students with disabilities, we are telling them that they belong, they are welcome, and that they are learning the skills they need to participate in society after school and will be better equipped to do so. Research also shows that students in inclusive classrooms tend to be happier, learn more, and spend more days at school, and those benefits are significant. Additionally, since inclusion benefits students with disabilities and those without, I believe it has a place in any teacher's practice. These are my sources. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed.